Well, today I am back with a detransitioner who is remaining anonymous, primarily because of concerns about hostility from the community, and it is just really hard to be public in this. But we wanted to talk a little bit about this detransitioner's experience, specifically with the detransition process. So, do you want to just go ahead and tell us a little bit about your story and catch us up as to where you are now?
Well, hello. I was on here once, probably about a year ago,
Yeah.
and just shared a little bit about how around the time, uh, I was a teenager in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, I decided to transition, and a lot of it was driven by a lot of experiences that compounded a lot of internalized phobia and homophobia in myself, and internalized misogyny in myself, and I transitioned after 10 years. So, or detransitioned after 10 years, excuse me.
So you had
Oh,
been on
funny.
hormones for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think, did you say also that you had had a mastectomy?
Yeah. I had a
Mhm.
mastectomy when I was 21 and then started hormones after that. There weren't as many, again, this wasn't like a big organized medical sort of thing like it was back then. So it was a
Right.
little bit more loosey goosey, I guess.
Although
Um,
it still seems like people are flying by the seat of their pants. It's sort of like, what will insurance cover? What does the parent want to do? What do the kids want to do?
right.
It doesn't seem like, I mean, even though they talk about standards of care, it seems like every person who's transitioning gets a different protocol based on sort of what the kid wants.
Right. And yeah, I think you're right. It's like there are some general agreed upon things, but then for the most part, a lot of this is still very experimental.
Yeah. And I think a
It's
lot of
not.
it really is, will the insurance pay for it? That seems
Oh,
to
oh
be
yeah.
key. I just watched a video yesterday. Buck Angel was interviewing this young man who started on hormones at 13, and and he was saying that they started him on hormones before puberty blockers because of the insurance would cover the hormones, and they had to like get go through an approval process for puberty blockers. And so again, it was just sort of this like, well, as long as we've got approval for the hormones, we'll go ahead and start that. And then when we get approval for the puberty blockers, we'll throw those in as well.
Crazy. I mean, I don't know. I always hear that puberty blockers are the pause button, so that kind of surprises me that they just went ahead and did it, and then they're
Yeah,
doing it
after
anyway.
listening to this kid, I'm like, no way, this is not a
Yeah.
pause button. He talked
Yeah.
about, even mentally feeling like he had sort of was taken back to childhood. His
Oh.
genitalia started shrinking, actually.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, yeah, it was really horrifying, the stories I'm hearing. And actually, I'm on a Lupron support group, which is more for women who took it for endometriosis. And the stories are horrifying. And these are grown women who took it. So I can't imagine, the kind of fallout we're going to have in, 5, 10
Yeah.
years from.
Any time I see something. I mean, I had another article pop up on my feed the other day about, again, not trans related anything. It was just, like you said, a group of girls who in childhood had had Lupron for
Yeah.
some reason or another. Like they either like started their cycle too soon, or
Right.
according to the doctor was what was too soon, or they something about it, I guess, can make you grow taller.
Oh,
Or
wow.
like if you use it in a certain way. I don't know.
Huh.
I didn't catch that part. It's something in this article had something to do with that. And so they used it, and now these women are in their 20s, and it's pretty horrifying that the enamel in their teeth are falling off. They're getting osteoporosis, they're having really brittle bones. But I felt like the reason that this article could be honest about what was going on was because it was not trans related. It was
Right. Yeah, it seems
related
like
to.
anything having to do with trans, suddenly, everybody puts their blinders up and pretends like everything is, peaches and cream. So
Yeah.
you were on testosterone for 10 years, you had a mastectomy, and then you detransitioned. How long has it been now since you've been off testosterone?
Let's see. Let me think really quick. It's been a year and a month
Okay.
since I stopped. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I was really interested in talking to you again is again, it has to do with insurance. And so you're going through this process of detransitioning, and you're finding out that it's much harder to find coverage for detransition treatments than it is for transition treatments.
It's hard to find anything for detrans anything. Really.
Right. There's just no support out there, period.
It's you know, um I'm trying to think like when I mean, sorry, I'm trying to think of where to start with all this because it's been, it's been a year
Yeah,
of a lot of a lot of interesting discoveries. But thankfully, I didn't have a hysterectomy. So I also kind of, if you don't mind, want to kind of share my physical experience
definitely.
because that's not something that I see a whole lot. There are some detransitioners sharing kind of what went on with them physically, but I feel like for a lot of people who maybe want to stop but are afraid to because they don't know what to expect,
Yeah.
which was sort of the camp I was in for a while.
Right, because there's not a lot of information out there. Again, this is all experimental.
Exactly. So um, after I stopped, the first thing, okay, so first I have to clarify, I never had a hysterectomy and I never had anything removed. And when I talked to the endocrinologist I was seeing in my area, he deals with quite a few trans related issues. And he told me that, in his opinion, removing all of that isn't necessarily necessary
Mhm.
because that was something that I had talked to about him with and asked him about. And, but again, this whole thing is so sort of uncharted that I think you'll
Right.
get multiple opinions from different people.
Yeah, it's interesting because Norman Spack, who I believe is at, gosh, I'm trying to remember. He's at some big clinic, maybe in Boston, where they're doing a lot of this transitional experimentation. And he actually, I have him on video saying that he recommends that once somebody's been on testosterone for a year, that he recommends, a hysterectomy and oophorectomy prophylactically, just because of the potential atrophy of the uterus and ovaries.
Right. And if you recall from my first video, I was finally, I don't know why it took my body so long, but
Mhm.
I think my body was very resistant to testosterone
Mhm.
because I didn't have a lot of the major side effects that I see people that have been on it this long have. But it took about that long for atrophy to start for me for whatever reason. And,
And what did that feel like?
it was, I wasn't having it as dramatically as some people have it, but usually it would be like, out of nowhere in the evening, I would start to have like period feeling cramps
Mm.
that were pretty painful. And after an orgasm, that's a pretty common one that you'll feel like this cramping, in
Oh,
your body.
bummer.
Yeah, not fun.
Yeah.
And around that time that I started to experience that, I was like, well, I should really have this taken look, have a look at this. And that's when my um basically my tissue down there was so thin and so fragile that it took multiple times to even get a pap smear done. Like
Ooh.
I had to go like 3 times, and
Oh.
the third time or the second time they gave me topical estrogen. That you don't use it consistently because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but if you just use straight estrogen, if you still have all of your equipment, that can lead to cancer as well. So I think I just used that for like a week or two, I want to say. And then by the time I went in to do it again, my tissues have recovered and it started to feel more normal. So anyway, that after that, when the tissue recovered was when I stopped because I'm like, okay, I'm not going to redo all that damage. This is ridiculous.
Wow.
It's pretty scary
Yeah.
to be
And it
dealing with
just
stuff
it's
like
just
that.
gets really thin and frail. Is that?
Yeah, it just gets very thin, very painful.
Mhm.
Any instrument, no matter how small it was, they try to put it in there for to get what they needed. It was really painful. It was, and
Oh,
they couldn't even. It was so sort of tightened together in there. They couldn't even really do anything. So
wow.
it was pretty sobering and pretty frightening.
It's pretty amazing how resilient the body is, though, that you can just put some estrogen there and it sort of responds within a couple weeks.
Right. And luckily, so when I stopped, someone close to me is an herbalist and helped me rebalance my hormones with that. And then 3 months after stopping was when my cycle finally came back.
Okay.
And when it did come back, it was actually shockingly normal. Like
Oh,
it,
good.
it, it was a little slow for about 3 months, and then it's been normal ever since.
Okay. And I think that the big difference that I'm hearing is that, those who have gone through puberty fully have much better response to detransitioning than those who
Yes,
start
100%.
testosterone either before puberty or mid puberty.
Absolutely, completely. Because I started probably, I was between 21 and 22. I can't remember how old I was when I started it. And yeah, my body was able to bounce back from it, even though I was on it for a long time, where, I am in quite a few detransition support groups. And you'll see girls who started when they were 13, 14, 15, like very young. And they'll have been on testosterone for a year and stop, and their cycle hasn't come back in years. Like it's just such a crapshoot, what's going to
Wow.
happen.
Well, and
And
that's the thing, we don't know where those developmental windows are. Puberty is such a sort of ephemeral thing. We don't know, and that's what's so scary about these interventions is, if you wait until someone's, gone through puberty and they're adult, I sort of feel like it's up to them. They can do, and their bodies are going to be more resilient, but we have no idea. Each child even is going to be different because we know puberty starts at different times with each child. So we can't even really come up with standards of care because every child's going to be different.
right. And everybody's body is going to be different. Even
Yeah.
people in different age groups have completely different things based on based on their history, based on their genetics, all this
Yeah.
other stuff.
Right, and their physiology, because you said that your body didn't respond to testosterone as much as some women's bodies respond,
Yeah.
bam, really
Like, I
quickly.
I don't think it did. Like, even for me, like I'm trying to think how to say it. I pretty early on, as long as I grew my hair longer and had no facial hair, would still start to get mammed by people,
Mhm.
My voice didn't drop that drastically, but again, I find that people who start testosterone when they're older don't always experience the same deepening of their voice that kids do when they're very young. Like there are
Right.
really
Yeah, and then
young.
there are young people who are on it for a month and their voice drops a couple octaves. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, and I think it's because they're still prepubescent in a lot of
yeah,
ways, or mid-pubescent, I guess. And so
right.
that I don't know what makes that more malleable, but it's like boom. And it's sad when you see detransition girls, like that's a huge one that appears in these groups a lot, where they started when they were in their early teens or mid-teens, and their voices are man's voices. They are deeper than mine, they're as deep as a man's voice, and they feel terrible.
Yeah.
They feel suicidal, they feel all these horrible things because there's as far as the voice goes, my voice, I would say, lightened up a little bit. Like the tone of it didn't really change, but the bassiness of it has lightened, and I don't know why that is, but a lot of people report that
Well, and
based
you
on.
mentioned something really that I think is really concerning, that the advocates of medically transitioning children early talk about the dysphoria and the dysmorphia and how unbearable it is for these kids and how we have to provide them with these interventions. But then for detransitioners, they kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, you can just learn to deal with it. And it's the same kinds of feelings. It's the same kind of intensity of feelings. It's the same kind of discomfort. And yet, in one case, they rush to medicalize. And in another case, they kind of just shrug it off and say, learn to deal with it, if
Yeah.
even that. And it's the response is so different. The fact that they're willing to tell detransitioners just kind of buck up and deal with it indicates to me that is a way to handle dysmorphia or dysphoria. I don't think it's the appropriate way. I think somewhere, there needs to be compassion and support for people. But I can't believe how callous the response has been to detransitioners and their feelings of distress and
Well,
and
and there's a lot of
dysmorphia.
victim blaming too
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
within that, even amongst certain detransitioners, because
Mhm.
there's a variety of opinions, from what I've observed. There are people who um very much are traumatized by gender ideology and want nothing to do with it. And then there are people who are still kind of kissing the ring, so to speak, and are very much still very much about that narrative. And, well, I was just this and didn't realize it. And I already kind of talked about that at great length, where I kind of feel like there's this idea of really cis or really trans is too simplifying it. I think that I I've watched a few videos by Scott Nugent, and he's now saying, like, I feel like trans is something that you become, and dysphoria is something you have, and I tend to agree with that perspective.
Right. And when I hear people, advocate medically transitioning kids who don't have dysphoria, I'm just like, What? What kind of world are we living in where we just sort of willy-nilly throw medications at kids because they want them?
And
That's so
yeah,
disturbing.
and
So
I feel
your
like
voice, you said your voice dropped, but yeah, when I listen to you, I would say that I mean, I know you're female, so I'm sure that that sort of sways my judgment a little bit, but I would say you're definitely in that androgynous zone.
right, and that's just where it's landed. Like sometimes people think I'm a man, sometimes people think I'm a woman. But I now identify as, and was when I was younger, a butch lesbian. So that's sort of just like I have a bad case of the SIRS anyway. you know. So at least at least I kind of feel okay in that. That's sort of my normal zone. You know what
Well,
I
and
mean?
it's so astounding to me, how sort of caught up we are in these sort of regressive, strange gender stereotypes. Because when I had a shaved head, people were sirring me,
Yeah.
and I'm a small person.
Yeah. And you definitely don't sound
Yeah, and I don't think
your
my
voice is
voice,
not
I
masculine.
don't know what I sound like to other people, but, it was just, they saw the hair and that's all they saw is. And so I think that a lot of times we have a society that doesn't pay a lot of attention to people. We just sort of quickly, sort of decide something about somebody and assign them something,
Yeah.
which is, I guess what we have to do to survive, but it means we're not paying a lot of attention really.
But what makes me kind of sad in these detransition groups, because like I said, I can feel like, well, and again, I don't mean to talk so flippantly about this, because I am a part of a very, very lucky few people who can pretty easily go back to where they were.
Right. Yeah.
Most people cannot. And or I'm not saying they cannot. I'm not saying they can't, but they have many more struggles and
Right.
many
They
more
there's
things that make it
right.
harder to be read as female again.
Yeah. So
And
what were what sort of your cycle started again? Did you notice other physical changes after you were off testosterone?
yeah, I let me think. I was really listless and tired and felt really awful for a few weeks after I stopped. And sorry. And it took my body a while to get back to a state of normalcy where I didn't feel that way anymore.
Which really
Um,
makes sense because it is, a steroid. I've heard that most people would sort of like, most women would feel a boost if they took some testosterone.
right. And when your
So,
hormones are all messed up,
yeah.
and your body's not really producing their own hormones yet, because I think it was like a car. In the beginning for me.
It's like,
And
what kind of gas am I running on now?
yeah, yeah. And so that was, I would say to anybody who is feeling the desire to stop testosterone, just expect that you're not going to feel great. And when I tried to stop testosterone multiple times, and usually when that would happen to me, I would take that as a sign, like, oh, I'm really
Yeah,
trans and my body wants a testosterone. No, 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 it's
yeah.
bullshit. It's not what's happening to you. Your body, your hormones are just jacked up, and you just need to give it time. And there are herbal things that you can do to help with that. I know some girls go on their I don't know what help this does, but they end up getting put on birth control immediately
Okay.
afterwards to help with something. But yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it probably sort of jump starts their cycle a little bit.
yeah, and there are things that you can do in either direction, but going the herbal route really helped with me. So if you went to an herbalist or somebody who is certified in those kinds of things and said, hey, how can you help me balance my hormones? And that's only trusting that you have not had a hysterectomy like I did. If you've had a hysterectomy,
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is another nightmare. And I've seen it happen to a friend of mine, and to other people where they will be desperately trying to get back on their natal hormone, and their provider will not help them do it. And it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to say that, but it's true. And on one of the groups, this girl posted about it and said that her doctor said, oh, they told me that they want to wait a year and make sure that I'm sure. They want to wait a year to be sure. They didn't wait a year to make sure she was sure before.
That's insane.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? And then she's like, I just want my body to be on what it's supposed to
Wow.
have. And then they
Wow.
were like, oh well, we don't know. That sounds risky. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? What universe are we in? And
Wow.
yeah,
And I think part of that is probably the endocrinologists having somewhat of a fear that if people start detransitioning more and more, then all of a sudden they're going to look bad.
I agree with you. I think that and I think that that's sort of the same kind of knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have. Um, like I said, there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on where
Yeah.
these young teenage kids, or just, in my case, like, I mean, we were still living in a culture that where it made sense for me to choose to do what I did. And I feel like that in itself is a little problematic. But
And
when
you were
you're
an
told,
adult. I mean, there is a
I
big
was still
difference.
mostly an adult. I mean, I was barely an adult, but I was
Yeah.
still old enough to make bad choices for myself.
Right. And I get very defensive for detransitioners because I feel like for the most part, every detransitioner I've talked to has a history of either autism or sexual assault or childhood trauma or internalized
Oh, 100%.
misogyny, internalized
Oh, yeah.
homophobia. There are these
Almost all of them.
underlying issues that are fueling it, and that they were let down by the medical system that just went ahead and put them on this drug without trying to identify what was going on.
And
What
I
were
feel
those
like,
underlying issues?
yeah, yeah. And I feel like the other big problem is, like, one that I see come up a lot with especially young detransitioners is other people telling them, well, you just need to own that you made a mistake and shut up. You just need to own that you screwed up and this isn't anybody's fault but yours. And I'm like, but that's not fucking true, because that study, I know you did an article about this, and I never have the names of things, so I sound completely uneducated, but the Swedish study that just came out, where
Oh,
they
right,
presented all of that information and said, actually, there's not any proof that this helps
right.
these people
Yeah,
along.
there's zero proof that it helps. Yeah,
So all these therapists and all these doctors, even when I was transitioning, are running off of this narrative and
yeah.
off of this assumption that if you have gender dysphoria, it's never going to go away, or you're going to be suicidal if you don't do something about it, and all this stuff. So they were running off of bad information.
Well,
And
and
so,
it's so interesting to me because these are the same people that I really doubt would blame an alcoholic for being an alcoholic.
right.
It's sort of like we're so forgiving of like all these other victims, but for some reason, this is one group that we're willing to shame and blame. And I don't understand that. And it's very concerning to me.
I think it's because it punches a hole in the narrative
Yeah.
that has been built around gender dysphoria in general. And and again, gender dysphoria, it's such a hard thing to pinpoint, because if gender dysphoria is just feeling uncomfortable with your gender, and I've said this before, every woman on the planet has gender dysphoria, at some point in their life. And this idea that it never alleviates is the dangerous part, that it can't alleviate.
Right, that we
That
have no control over it and that
there
we're going
has
to
to be a
kill
medical
ourselves.
intervention.
And it's frustrating because we have really good cognitive behavior therapy techniques now that we can use for all sorts of other mental health issues. But for some reason, this is the one mental health issue that we're not willing to address with these techniques. And again, that's why I am absolutely convinced that this is being motivated by money,
Yeah.
because there's such a huge profit because you medicalize these people. They're especially children, they're on Lupron, which is really expensive. Then they go on cross-sex hormones, which is expensive. And now I'm noticing that they're talking about fertility treatments, which are really expensive. And I've even heard of some people saying that they're needing to give growth hormones sometimes because the combination of puberty blockers and hormones will stunt growth. So these kids are being medicalized. And like you said, if they're put on these interventions as children, they're going to their endocrine system isn't going to kick back on. And so if they do detransition, they're medicalized. If they stay transition, they're medicalized. Either way, big pharma is making the big bucks.
Yeah, well, I definitely think big pharma is seeing an opportunity and saying, "Hey, as long as we're at it, why don't we do something nice for ourselves?" And I feel like the other part of that narrative is I think that older trans people from back in the day did us all an enormous disservice because I think that in a way it was almost a selfish desire to push how fucking serious this is, how hard this is, how blah blah blah, so that they could get this covered by insurance and could get this to be what it is. But by slamming those narratives so hard and saying like, "Hey, this is how it's always going to be," and I knew from the time I was 3, and da 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 da, and maybe for them that was true, or maybe not. Maybe we have a tendency to over exaggerate when we're trying to get something we want, um, and I think that laying down that foundation for people to be moving from was not a service to a lot of people, as we're starting to see.
Well, and we just had a new research from Ken Zucker come out. Then this is longitudinal that he's been doing for a long time. Again, showing that I think 88% of those who are gender dysphoric will outgrow it during puberty. That puberty is curative. That actually we need puberty in order to help manage and sort of accept ourselves. And so we're actually we're putting on hold the very thing that is the cure for most of these kids.
Yeah,
I honestly believe that the vast majority of those who are gender dysphoric before all of this were either gender nonconforming or gays and lesbians, and that it's easier to be um, a straight trans person than it is a gay or lesbian in a lot of cases. In Iran, we actually have the gays and lesbians are told that they have a choice between transing or being killed. This is
yeah.
this is very entrenched in our culture, and kids are growing up with this. And I really believe that the vast majority of pre-LGBT movement trans people had internalized homophobia and externalized. We're picking up on, this is dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for me to be a gay person. I'm going to transition and it will be safer. Or they're gender nonconforming and it's easier just to say, I'm actually a man than to be a gender nonconforming woman. And so I think if we were as accepting as a society as we purport to be, there actually would be very, very few transgender people.
I think I have mixed. I mean, I agree with you, but I also feel like it's gotten wider than that. Because
Hmm.
like back in the day, and I agree with you, transitioning like male to female transgender people were definitely sort of seen as an extension of the butch lesbian culture.
Yeah.
And and it was, I think back then, you're right, very much motivated by safety and very much motivated by just wanting a sense of normalcy and wanting to be able to present the way you wanted to in a more masculine fashion without being harassed or correctively raped or like what all those horrible things. But now, in the detransition groups, there are a few butches in there, but there's a lot more young straight girls in there.
Who just don't like having their periods or who just somehow got pulled into this because they're autistic
Yeah.
or
or
because
or weren't even autistic. Like sometimes it's just like they got sucked into an exciting popular subculture because that's what
right,
they do. And that's
right.
sort of, and so many people are like, why would anybody choose to be this? You're full of shit, blah blah blah. But I see it happen a lot where it's like, well, it's like, remember when everybody was bisexual in the 90s?
Right. Well,
you
and
know
there are these, trends that we see, and you see, I've talked to so many parents who say their kids were sort of nerdy and not very popular, and then they came
oh
out as
wow.
trans, and suddenly, like, the school was having a party for them. They were suddenly the most popular kid in school, and they were able to kind of wield this power that most kids don't have, you know?
And that age, that formative age of being a teenager, you are trying to distance yourself from your childhood. You're trying to distance yourself from your parents. You're trying to show that hey, I'm different. I'm unique. I'm, blah, blah, blah. And I think that currently this has been lifted up as like the coolest, most, sort of edgy thing you can be right now, but
Yeah.
that's still socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And
I often joke that the best way for us to stop this is for parents to start transitioning.
yeah, yeah, I mean that may be, and I think that, it's another thing where I feel very kind of traumatized by everything that's happened to me and everything I see happening to other
Well,
kids
I'm
and
sorry, I
trans.
shouldn't joke about it because it is so,
Oh no, that's fine. That's not why I brought it up. I'm just
yeah.
saying that I feel kind of traumatized by these things, and it's gotten to the point where I cannot turn on a new movie or a new anything without there being a trans character in there or being, and I've still only seen like one or two butch lesbian characters in anything in my entire life.
That's a really good point.
So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
so it's sort of like one state of mind is being completely normalized and the other one is being completely ignored. And I think it's because our media doesn't think you can make butch lesbian sexy or something, or men aren't going to be
Yeah,
into
they're
that.
not.
And so they don't, there's just
That's
not,
really just that's disturbing as I think about it. I'm like, yeah, there really
yeah.
aren't, and there
So
aren't really that many butchy women. Period. I mean, we were talking a little bit about. I've always sort of identified as butchy because I am I sort of have this weird mix of feminine and gender nonconforming characteristics. Like,
yeah,
but I think part of my resolving my gender dysphoria was to sort of say, okay, well, it's okay. I'm just gender nonconforming. I'm just kind of butchy, and that's
yeah,
sort of the way I've sort of resolved it in my head. But you don't see that very much. You don't see these even the strong characters that you see coming out are they've got like the shape and they're sexualized in a way that is they might be strong and you know um kick ass, but they're still very sexualized. They're
yeah. Like
still,
Scarlett Johansson comes to mind. She's in
yeah.
these badass roles, but she gets to be badass as long as she's still sexy. I
Right, right.
very rarely see a butch woman in anything. Like I can think of like Alien 2, like
Yeah, and I don't think I saw that, probably because it wasn't very
yeah,
popular.
yeah, yeah. So there's like a character in there that was very like masculine female. It's just not that common. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of like kids, like it or not, they're being raised by YouTube, they're being raised by the internet, they're being raised by all these things. And if you're showing one thing being strongly represented and not the other, you're going to start to kind of normalize one and not the other.
Well,
And
and
I,
it
and
does
it
have such a
normalizes.
huge impact because I remember when I was a little girl, I was probably about I was probably in 5th grade, and my next door neighbor, this woman moved in, and she was so cool. I had kind of a crush on her. She was so cool. And she moved in the fall, and I actually had been doing some work with her. And then it was summer, and she asked me to mow her lawn. And she came out, and she was wearing shorts and had hairy legs. And it was the first time I saw a woman with hairy legs, and I was like, oh,
Can that happen? Yeah.
that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and the fact that I had gone until I was that age, and ostensibly my mother was a feminist. It just, but I
Yeah. It's just,
never saw that. So,
yeah. Yeah. But, they're not going to put that in Hollywood. So,
oh,
so yeah, it's just like all these things that aren't normalized and a lot of things that are. And I feel like, especially with the trans stuff, the part that disturbs me the most about everything is it feels a little bit like a slow grooming process that the entire culture's been put through, where we're not looking at surgeries as major anymore.
that's so true because I hear like I'm in some parent groups and they talk about like, oh yes, my daughter's having mastectomy. She only has to be out of work for 3 months. And I'm like,
It's like
this is major surgery. Like
this is
this is not
huge.
this is huge, or hysterectomies. And they sort of like this is life-saving, and they really minimize the side effects. People die from this. These are elective. They have serious side effects, complications, and like you said, people are writing them off. And then we come out on the other end, and we're like, we got off track again. I keep wanting to
Yeah.
ask you about your detransition. What kind of services were available for you to help you detransition?
Okay, so this is getting into something interesting, and this is really why I wanted to talk today because I think people just need to know this because this is true. I went through this, so my everything kind of went back as far as it could. My hair lightened up a little bit, my voice lightened up a little bit. My period came back. My levels went back to normal, and that's kind of what you're left with. My voice is where it's at, and my chest is where it's at. So what I have tended to find in the D-trans groups, because I thought about breast reconstruction surgery, and the on and this is another thing people need to know, like, because they something I hear them tell nervous parents a lot is these things are reversible, and the truth is these things are absolutely 100% not reversible. You can alter them after the fact to be closer to what you have, but you cannot recreate what you had. That's impossible. So, for breast reconstruction, there's two options. One option is you do breast implants, which are going to have to be done a little differently because you don't have any tissue to put them under, any breast tissue. So I think it goes under the muscle or something like that. I want to say it sounds a little gruesome,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't know this, but every 10 years, if you've had breast implants, you have to have them replaced. So
Uh,
I was thinking about it, and I'm like, when I'm in my 60s, if I'm reach my 60s, am I gonna want to be having breast surgery again when I'm already traumatized by the first one, and I'm gonna do this to myself every 10 years? I'm like, I can't do that. The other option is you can harvest tissue from a different part of your body, usually your abdomen or somewhere you've got some fattier tissue, and then they can sort of resculpt it, put it in and make a flap and make breasts out of it. And I thought of that, and I didn't really want to opt for that either because again, especially if it comes from the abdomen, you're going to have a major scar across your abdomen.
mm.
I'm already working so hard to try to make the scarring from my mastectomy better, years later because it was terrible scarring. And I'm like, do I really want to do that to my body again? So I kind of reached a point where for myself, and this is not to disrespect girls who are like, I absolutely have to do this, because I get it. Everybody has their comfort zone, everybody has their thing, but I just think people need to be aware those are going to be your options if you're a woman.
And
And
they're not great options for sure.
they're not reversals.
Yeah, no, no, in no way, because I don't think you're going to get the nipple sensitivity back. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely different. Everybody has different results with
yeah,
that. But the point is that most of the girls who do this have to go do it out of pocket because they told me, anytime that I'm applying for this for my insurance to do reconstructive surgery as if it were like breast cancer reconstruction or whatever, they deny it. And
because they
so,
consider it elective, right?
or cosmetic,
Or
they consider it.
cosmetic, which is amazing. So did they cover your initial mastectomy?
No, but back in the day, that had not, like, it was not covered by
Right, it was
insurance.
not covered. These
But if
days,
I, but
these
if I
days
was,
it
oh
seems like
yeah,
it's covered easily.
yeah,
Like most insurance and I think that there are lots of places where, even children can get it covered if their parents' insurance doesn't cover it.
I have a local friend who decided to get top surgery, mastectomy, and they had been on hormones for about a year, and I don't think they needed a letter or anything, but I know they got their breasts removed, and then I know they were kind of regretful about it not long after, and said that the process. And again, this isn't going to be every single person's experience, but they felt like it was almost a conveyor belt, like, all right, let's get it done,
Yeah.
and didn't feel very much personal care.
Well,
Um,
and it's interesting because teenagers typically will not be allowed to have cosmetic surgery, and again, they're getting this workaround by
unless
saying
it's
this is
this,
like
yeah,
medically necessary, which it isn't. It is not medically necessary. If
right,
there's a girl who has very large breasts and wants them reduced, that could be considered medically necessary. If they're so big that they're
right,
causing them back problems or some other issues, but actually having full mastectomy is not medically necessary. Um,
right.
but now we're hearing quite regularly about girls 13, 14, 15-year olds having their breasts removed, and boys at 15 and 16 having orchiectomies, having their
Right.
testicles cut
And
off.
and
That
I know that
certainly is not reversible. I mean,
right. And I
unfortunately,
know that comes from that narrative that when you're a child, you know from the time you're a child and it never goes away and then it tortures you for the rest of your life until you
yeah.
kill yourself or you transition.
So,
And
so they would not cover for you to have
that's not
breast
true.
reconstruction.
Mhm.
Are there other services that you were able to get? Is there anything you were able to get?
Well, I was, my insurance covered therapy, so I got to
Okay.
talk to a therapist, and that was interesting. Like he's been very understanding and very nice, but I'm the very first person he's ever talked to who's going through this. But in a way, that's good because I know I'm not going to be the last.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, so so that was covered, and so my Pap smear has been covered. Just the basic general let's check you out thing has been covered. So I did actually, because one of the things that made me really sad, and it made a lot of people, makes a lot of detransitioner detransition women sad that I've met, was you lose your singing voice, it changes,
Yes.
you can't do what you used to be able to do with it, and that was something that was really bumming me out. And so I was just curious. I just wanted to ask to find out. I know that in my state, pretty much every trans thing you can think of is covered, and they do what do they call it, a glottoplasty in parts of my state, which is a surgery where they sort of use a laser to shorten your vocal folds so that if you're biologically male, you can have a more female sounding voice. It's like
Okay.
tightening it like a guitar string.
Right.
And this is good for me to share too, because I know there are women who are like, "Oh my God, can I do this? Can I have the surgery? Can this be an option for me?" And I'm just going to share what I found, and you know, you might get different opinions from other people, but this is what happened to me. So I was like, I just want to find out. I just want to find out. So I had to, if my insurance would even cover this, if I even wanted to do something like this, if this is even safe or logical for me to do anything like this. And so I contacted the insurance. They had no freaking clue. Then I contacted my personal doctor, who sent a referral to the endocrinologist who deals in trans issues to ask him if he knew. He didn't know, so he had to make a referral to the doctor who actually did the vocal, was vocal surgery, and that wasn't his only specialization. He obviously just did anything to do with voice and throat and all that stuff. So I finally get in to see him probably almost a year after I've started the process of trying to just find out,
Oh, wow.
if this is something that can be covered or not. And so I drive a great distance to get to this place, and I get to the front desk, and they told me, well, we tried to contact you yesterday to let you know that your consultation was denied by your insurance.
Oh,
And but I mean, there were other things in the consultation. They were going to do a scope. I was going to talk to this doctor, and I was going to talk to a speech therapist that was there. And so I was freaking out. It was going to be like $2,000 out of pocket to pay for this thing if I was to actually pay for it. And so I'm like, they're like, well, we appealed it, but we're not sure, da, da, da. And I, first of all, I asked them, hey, like, can I hear what is going on? Like, why did it get denied? And I got this, I have this piece of paper in front of me. This is what the girl at the front desk printed for me, but it says, insurance denied, citing rule number 0127, reversal of gender reassignment not covered after surgery for cosmetic issues.
oh.
So
So they actually
anything,
have a policy and have a
yeah,
number assigned to it.
yes, there is a policy
Wow.
that if you are going in reverse, they do not consider it necessary. It's covered.
Wow. There you
Uh,
go.
yeah. So, but again, it completely negates this whole idea where it's like, oh, we're preventing suicides and we're preventing blah, blah, blah. It's like, have you talked to any detransitioners? Because if you want to see some actual suicidal ideation, go
Yeah.
talk to them because
Yeah.
holy shit.
Well, and it's the same feeling of discomfort. And so why is it that
It
in one
works.
case we're going to affirm it and we're going to cover it and we're going to, move people forward. In the other
Yeah.
case, we're basically going to, tell them you're on your own and to deal with it.
I think it's actually worse
Yeah,
because
it is. I think you might be right because
in,
they have
in the
been
beginning,
a
you're starting with,
disservice.
oh, I don't like myself. I don't like how my
Yeah.
body is. But there are ways to change your body. Once you've done this, you're
Yeah.
stuck with what you've done. And if you regret it, you can't do a damn thing about it. And
Well, and
it's
you've also been taught that those feelings are inescapable and that you can't do anything about them. That's what you've
you're
just been taught.
and you're dealing with the psychological, the cognitive dissonance of living as the opposite gender for so
Right.
long, which is a real thing. Like there's major psychological problems with detransitioners that
Mhm.
again aren't really talked about and aren't really being treated. Where there's, you go through all the stages of grief when you come out of this on the other side, and it's pretty awful. But anyway, so the point is that then they took off they said, well, let's take off the speech consultation, because, and this is something that they kind of affirmed to me, that any kind of speech therapy in America is absolutely not going to be covered by insurance, no matter who you are. So they took that off and they took off the scope, and I just went to go talk to the doctor, and I know they appealed it. I have not received a bill yet, knock on wood. So
Yeah.
hopefully they at least accepted that. And I went and sat and talked with him, and he was very nice, and thank God he was very honest. He said that he talked to a another surgeon who performed this surgery, this glottoplasty, on a woman for the exact same reason. She was detransitioning the whole thing, and the result was very bad.
Mm.
And he said that her voice ended up being very raspy and not sounding good at all. And so his recommendation was not to do it. And he said that the major reason for that is that obviously a biological male's vocal tract is going to be different than a woman's vocal tract who's just been on testosterone. That it's like your voice, your vocal cords don't automatically turn into men's vocal cords. That's not how it works. You basically become a woman going through menopause when you take
Right.
testosterone, and so your voice deepens just like you do when you're older.
Yeah. Interesting.
So anyway, so he was very honest, thankfully, and told me that. So I'm like, okay, at least I have an answer there, that this is off the table, because I don't want to risk that.
Yeah.
And then he said, what else did he say? He said that in his opinion, and again, I don't know, this is just his opinion, he could see where over the years, depending on how long somebody's been on testosterone, that you can have not a complete reversal, but you can have lightening in your voice occur. And he said that's because, when you're on testosterone, your muscles get bigger and this whole other thing.
Ah, okay.
And
So
that
as the
includes
muscles
your,
change.
yeah, and that includes in your voice, the muscles that you know,
Hmm.
that work with your vocal cords. And so he said, that can lighten up. And he said, we don't completely understand the way that different hormones affect the vocal tract. We know what testosterone does mostly, but there are other factors involved. So he said you might see that. And in my opinion, just having heard detransitioners, like the less time they've been on testosterone, the more you kind of hear their voices go back to a more
Right.
feminine sounding
But
voice.
again, it's just another indication that this is all experimental. We really have
Yeah.
no idea. And
And they
again,
don't know.
the earlier that kids get on this, the more the more damage is done, the more permanent these changes are.
Exactly.
And they're not reversible. The other thing I was curious about is that I have seen transitioners celebrate their insurance paying for facial feminization, for laser surgery, for Adam apple shave, all kinds of what I would consider cosmetic surgeries, because
Oh,
if I
highly.
wanted to get them done, because I was unhappy with my looks, my insurance wouldn't cover it, even though it would
Yeah,
be in
exactly.
theory the
And what if,
same.
yeah, and that's the thing where I don't get it, because they say, well, for this, it has to be covered. But, there are
Like
women
men
who,
are allowed to be pretty women, but women aren't. Men are going to be covered by insurance to be prettier, but women aren't going to be covered by insurance to be prettier.
right. And I feel like it's that, again, that whole suicide depression narrative, but there
Right.
are plenty of women who are suicidal and depressed because they don't look the way that they want to look.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are women who have, pretty significant deformities, or, have had accidents, have had, something happen,
Right.
and could really benefit from cosmetic surgery, but that won't be covered because it's considered elective. It is really infuriating that they will, again, cover it in one direction, but not the other. And these are really expensive procedures. And again, I get on my, this just raises my hackles, because I start thinking about all that money being spent on what is, in essence is elective. that if, you know, if
Right.
they went to good therapists and got good behavioral therapy, they would not need these interventions. And instead, all this money is being spent in what are essentially cosmetic interventions.
Yeah.
And all that money could be used in such better ways. You know, we have kids who aren't eating well, who aren't nourished well. We have homeless people. We
Right.
have people who aren't getting, you know, the very basic nutritional needs met. And yet here we have this whole industry dedicated to encouraging people to embrace this very superficial idea of what beauty is and what, you know, aesthetics are, and how they should look depending on how they believe they should look.
Well, and like anorexia, I feel like gender dysphoria can be a very selfish disorder, you know,
Yeah,
where it's like I'm going to get what I want and to hell with everybody else, and that's kind
right.
of also the narrative that's being pushed with kids towards their parents, kids towards their peers. Like if but anyway, before we divert from the story, I just wanted to add one part at the end that was very sobering and very frightening to me. So I've had this consultation. I'm like, okay, thank you very much. This could have been done over the phone, but whatever. And and anecdotally, because he was talking about how speech therapy was my best choice, and he's like, but they don't really cover that with insurance, and he was like, and there are certain things. He's like, he told me that for transgender surgery, that Kaiser tends to be the one that will pay for the most in his experience. I don't know if that will be a rabbit hole for somebody else, but that's what I heard. The point of the story is he tells me, oh, well, Kaiser will pay for it, but they won't pay for everything. And then he anecdotally told me that, oh, I'm having a patient coming in and that he's going to be taking a part of this person's rib out of their chest and putting it in their throat to create an Adam's apple.
Oh,
And I something in that moment just like hit me so hard, where it's like this is anorexia type obsession, because I've been there, with that, with my eating disorders in the past, where you are so deeply obsessed with the appearance of your body and how other people are perceiving it, that you will undergo a major surgery just to have a little piece of tissue in your throat that wasn't there before. That's the
we're
kind of
really
nit-
promoting such an unhealthy way of kids looking at themselves and
well,
grown-ups like,
that's the kind of nitpicking that you do when you are an anorexic or
yeah,
when you have an eating disorder of any kind. That's the
yeah.
kind of neurotic behavior that you get.
Well, and for doctors to be supporting this in any way, I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
like,
It's kind of
yeah, I
it's
mean,
disturbing. Like, and I thought of that. Who signed off on that? What's
I
like tell
actually, that reminds me, I did see a post about a guy who wanted to have a thinner waist, a smaller waist, because he was presenting as female, and he was talking to his doctor about having his bottom rib removed.
Oh my
So-
God.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, this is insanity.
And
Uh,
that's again to reach a sexualized image of women, not to
exactly.
just live as a woman. That's
Right.
you know,
And what is this doing for, you know, all of us who are just normal looking, not necessarily super attractive men and women? The message that is out there now for kids is that if you don't meet these stereotypical ideals, there's something wrong with you, and that your insurance will actually even cover it for you to attain these ideals. It is
yeah.
really disturbing to me.
What's disturbing is again how groomed we've been to look at this like it's no big deal. Like if you had told somebody that 20 years ago, the whole rib Adam's apple thing, you're out of your goddamn mind. Like
They would think you were nuts.
yeah. And now it's like, oh well, yeah. And then the
Well,
same
not
thing.
to mention phalloplasty, when you see people who have, you know, they've got like these huge scars, you know, one on their arm, one on their leg, but they've got this, you know, little piece of tissue now hanging between their legs.
That
Um,
doesn't do anything. That just sort of
yeah, but
hangs
just
out.
looks, yeah, just hangs out. I mean, yeah,
It's
and then we sort of just shrug and say, oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, the mastectomy, like you said, you've got significant scars that we just sort of have become so acclimated to it. It's like we've just slowly been, you know, fed this narrative, and now everybody's just like, oh, isn't that wonderful? And they're having like parties to celebrate surgeries, elective cosmetic surgeries that are, you know, in some cases life threatening, that can have extreme complications.
I feel like just like with transitioning, you have to live in this state of cognitive dissonance. And I talk about that a lot, where it's like, especially if you've not had bottom surgery, if you're a woman, anytime you live in this cocoon of illusion that you're a man in the outside world and even to yourself. And the only thing you need to break out of it is to take your pants off. And so you're kind of in this constant battle in your mind with yourself about what's true and what's not. And I think that as a culture, because this narrative has taken such a massive grasp on it, as a culture too, have almost sort of lost the ability to see things as they really are. And I think that the normalization of major surgery for children or for young people or whatever, like it's not a big deal, is part of that, because it is a big deal. And especially for people who end up regretting their choices, it's like a horror movie, like it's real body horror when you snap out of that cognitive dissonance or snap out of that state of mind and are stuck with a body that has the marks of your self-hatred all over it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and how like you are in a detransition groups. How do you sort of walk somebody through that? Like, because I sort of see stages when I've talked to different detransitioners, and it seems like occasionally someone will just sort of have this epiphany of like, holy crap,
Yeah,
I've been lied to. This
yeah.
is all BS. How could people have let me do this? But a lot of times there's this sort of gradual thing of like, uh-oh, um, I'm going to pretend like it's just I made a mistake. It's okay for everybody else. But I made a mistake. And I've even seen detransitioners who talk about feeling really guilty for having taken services away from true trans people. And
Yeah,
like,
and then
oh
they
my
have
gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I shouldn't have
I
done
know.
this.
And it's
And I'm
mostly
like,
and look
what?
and look at that. It's mostly girls who say that.
Mhm.
And
Of
girls and women
course.
in general are always conditioned to apologize for inconveniencing other people or apologize that I made a mistake.
Or I'm
So
taking up too many resources.
yeah, we're conditioned to do that. We're
Yeah.
women. That's just the way it is. And that's the other crazy thing. Like you can change somebody's body, but you cannot change hundreds and hundreds of years of cultural conditioning with
Right.
just that. You can't.
And so when somebody comes into the group, first of all, I'm curious because the opposition says like the number of detransitioners is minimal. There's hardly any. Are you seeing an uptick or is it pretty consistent?
I'm seeing an uptick, and it's gradual, but and part of the reason I think that, and again, not every single person on this Reddit is detransitioning. There's parents in there, there's just curious people in there, whatever. But I'm gonna just pull up the detransition group on Reddit really quick, and let's see how many people are in it. So when I first got in here, there was like I don't know, like 8,000 people, and now there's 19,211
Oh,
people.
wow. That's a
That's a
big
lot of
increase.
people.
That's a lot of people.
That's not a small number of people that are
Well, and
curious.
the thing that I keep hearing too, and this is something that I want to like just like put out there for detransitioners, just like loud and clear that every single woman that I know has had some discomfort with being a woman. And I see this in the detrans groups where they'll say like, I'm still really struggling feeling good about being a woman. And I'm like, that's normal.
Yeah, it's like then you're
That's
paying attention.
normal.
You're paying attention to how your culture treats you if you're
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's we are especially now when we are, I feel like being conditioned to really I mean, the whole culture, it seems like right now has gotten to be even more misogynistic than it was when I was younger. Um, and it's just shocking to me how sexualized girls are from such an early age. And I'm like, I have struggled with feeling and I want to say it's not that you're uncomfortable, it's you're uncomfortable with all that society is doing to you. All these messages that you're getting that you are not okay if you are not, the perfect looking, the perfect acting, the perfect beauty model that is rich and famous and has, everything she wants. There are
Well,
these
yeah.
messages that we're just inundated with that, that everybody else is happy, but you're not. And that's just false. It's just not true.
Well, and I've thought about this a lot, obviously. And I think, I mean, anytime you want to understand any of this crap, you just have to go to the money and you think about,
Yeah.
you know, the massive amount of money that what we pull out of women for cosmetic surgery, for makeup, for all this different stuff. And if women or people in general, men aren't off the table either. They're getting sold cars, they're getting sold all this shit that they're told, they need to have in order to be whole. And I think that if people there's no profit in people being happy with how they are, you
Yeah,
know?
imagine if everybody just said, Screw this.
Yeah. Any
I'm gonna accept
any
who I am."
any marketing scheme depends on your dissatisfaction with yourself. And
Right.
I feel like a lot of people would say, no, it's different, it's completely different, and identity is different. But I just don't see, especially coming out the other end of this, as massive a difference between people who obsessively get plastic surgery and people who are obsessively getting plastic surgery to transition
Right.
aesthetically.
It's all about attaining a goal. And I can't tell you how many detransitioners
Oh
I
yeah.
talk to who have like, well, I tried this and it didn't work. I still felt awful. So I did this and it
Okay.
helped for
Yeah.
a little bit, but it still didn't help. So I did this. And they're told,
Oh
they're
yeah.
told this bill of goods that if they keep going a little bit further, eventually they'll have that.
Finally be
those-
happy.
Right. And
Will
it's just,
finally be whole.
right.
And I wonder how many procedures that person who got the rib taken out had gone through before they were finally like, oh God, nothing else is working. The Adam's apple, that's what I need. I need that, need to have that.
Can't even imagine like what the mentality is and how a surgeon feels okay about that.
It's
That's
the
where I
thing.
really am concerned, because I feel like our whole medical system is losing its integrity and undermining its ability to really have to inform us, because they're lying so blatantly about some of this stuff.
And I think that's, a big reason, because you asked, what are what's the progression with detransitioners? And I think we go through all the stages of grief, and in our own ways. But I do think that it's almost like being gaslit when you detransition a little bit, where you're just like, you've come out of this, you've seen the other end of it, you really have a full spectrum of what this is like, and yet you look at people on the inside still and go like, oh my God, like, how do we not see how harmful this is being to so many people? And I really feel like it's a lot of people have been making this illusion, but I feel like it's very true that it's like leaving your religion.
Mhm.
You lived in this worldview, for this paradigm, for however many years. You really, even if you didn't 100% know it was true, you still acted as if it was and believed it. And when you stop believing in the narrative, you get shunned by people who are still in there, because they don't want anybody to be in that's going to dissuade anybody else's opinion or make them feel bad about their choices.
Yeah.
And you're kind of on the outside looking in, going like, how did I ever believe that? And I think it's very frustrating to a lot of us, especially when we're, or like, our experiences aren't welcome at the table.
Yeah. So what can, as we're kind of wrapping this up, what can we do to support detransitioners? If you had some advice for, for parents, for advocates, for people who are, gender critical, about how we can help sort of move this forward, fast forward it so that we can get to to the end of this quicker. What would be your suggestions?
Okay, so I think, like, foremost, the most important thing that people can do for detransitioners is to um, we need to have our own methods of mental health care. We
Mhm.
need to have tools in place to help somebody get through this. And that has to start with people acknowledging that this is going to be happening. That as we have these massive influx of supporting people being medicalized, that not all those people are going to want to do this for the rest of their lives. That's just a fact. And it's going to be more and more and more. I really believe that. And I think that they have to, first of all, acknowledge that this isn't just one tiny percent, like 1% of this population go through this and it's because of religious reasons. Like, that's nonsense. It's not true. Um, it's a lie. And so we have to acknowledge we exist, and then you have to figure out methods. Psychologists, psychiatrists have to figure out methods to help us work through this grief, because this is a grief unlike anything. This is on par with somebody who loses a part of their body in an accident, except you did it to yourself. So
Right.
this is like even more complex than that. This isn't even an accident. This isn't cancer took away your breast. This
Well,
is
and it's
something else.
self-harm that was enabled by authority figures who were supposed to be there helping you.
Exactly. So there's so many feelings going on in you. There's betrayal. There's a certain degree of feeling very what's the word I want to use? Almost it's not exploited, but where you feel like
They weren't there for you for sure.
yeah, yeah, God, what is the word I want? It's a perfect word for this feeling, and I just like my brain's not working. Um, it's a feeling of uh like not exposed, but where you just feel like like you've been not used, but it's just like it feels gross. It feels like you've kind of been victimized. You feel like um you have a lot of anger, you have a lot of grief, you have feelings of anger towards yourself, hatred towards yourself for allowing yourself to go down this path. You end up having feelings of abandonment for a lot of people who were largely part of the trans community for a long time and then were completely rejected, which is very common to be
Yeah.
completely rejected because they're like, oh, you're a turf now, bye. You
Right.
know, there's so many things that go on and it's all compacted in one person in one event, where you have the loss of your physical well-being, you have the loss of your social group, you have the loss of your paradigm that you used to believe in, like as traumatic as like leaving a religion, and then you are bombarded constantly by media that's affirming a choice that is not going to end well for a lot of people,
Right.
and it's a lot to take in, and I feel like
And
we need.
often these are already people who have underlying issues that were not addressed. Um, and so
Yeah,
you're,
we need
ugh,
specialized care. Like I had to talk to my therapist and be like, what would you do for somebody who like is an amputee? What would you do for somebody who like, cause it's sort of like that, but it's like
but
even
it's so
crazier.
different. It's different in so many ways because the amputee didn't, walk around saying that they thought they were an amputee and everybody saying, "Oh yeah, you're an amputee," and then the doctor saying, "Oh yeah, I'll cut your leg off.
Yeah.
That'll be
Those
great.
people do
That'll
exist
help."
though. Those
I
people do
know that
exist.
that's a
I'll
new
say that.
thing, but yeah, I do feel like this is the complexity of it. And then you've also got these messages that you just, I mean, I hear it every day. These messages of people telling kids that if they don't transition, they're going to kill
Oh,
themselves.
the word, you feel violated. You feel violated.
Violated.
That's
Yes.
the word. Good God. It's still morning. But that's the word I was trying to say. You feel violated
Oh,
because you were a vulnerable person
yeah.
who was being ushered into this by adults, and it feels almost like a sexual violation.
Yeah, I would think that it is even more profound than a recovery from a rape because um, a rape victim has all sorts of things to deal with for sure. And I don't want to minimize anybody's trauma. But in this case, again, you've got the very people who you trusted, who were supposed to be helping you, who were violating you. Um,
Yeah,
who were encouraging you to self harm, who were enabling this self harm, and then who often rejected you once you acknowledged that you had been self-harming. Ugh,
yeah, and
it's
it's so
heavy.
it's very complicated, and I would love for any interested therapists. This is uncharted territory.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
somebody needs to come up with a plan to help people out of this
And the
because
other
you'll
thing that I
definitely have
see is
one.
that there are all sorts of resources for the LGBT community. There's, housing resources, food resources, clothing, medical care. I haven't seen anything for detransitioners. There isn't any sort of support system like that
Well,
available for
I
detransitioners.
think it messes up the narrative.
Yeah,
Certain people like the narrative to be what it is because it allows them to have surgery and allows them to have hormones and whatever have you, and they don't really care who gets hurt in the process as long as they get what they want.
yeah,
And and that isn't to say, like, again, I still mostly stand with the idea that if you're a grown adult and you are making this choice for yourself and you want to do these things, then by all means do it. But this sort of fast tracked conveyor belt for everybody else, including children, like does they're basing it entirely off of narratives from like mostly I would say trans women and men who were like, well, I felt this way my entire life and blah blah blah. And not really allowing anybody to look at the social complexities here about like,
Right.
well, maybe sexism has a part to play in here, or maybe, trauma has a part to play in here. And it's sort of like they won't accept any other narrative than the one that they've already provided for us. And that's hurting a lot of people.
Well, I really appreciate your willingness to share your insight. I feel like it's really critical, and um, you're sort of leading the way for a lot of people, and I really appreciate your efforts. And I'm hoping maybe we can check in again in 6 months or a year just to see where things are. I keep hoping that the bubble will burst and people will suddenly go, "Oh my God, what have we been doing?"
It
Um,
will happen. I actually fully believe it's going to happen eventually.
yeah,
I don't think it's going to happen immediately, but I always think back to when the lobotomy used to be a completely acceptable thing to do to people for any variety of things, and it was sworn up and down that this was this great intervention. And we know obviously now that that's not the case, but it
right.
takes time to get anywhere.
It
And
does.
I fortunately feel like it's going to take these kids that have been on Lupron this year reaching their 20s for us to really fully get the full scope of what we have
Right.
been condoning.
And seeing the full implications of this experimental intervention,
Yeah, it's going to
and the
take that
horror
before
of it.
anything changes,
Yeah,
because we know the results are going to be bad,
yeah,
because every doctor who has not been pushed into silence has said so, that
yeah,
this is not good for anybody's body.
yeah,
But we'll get there eventually, and I hate to
yeah,
say that it's going to be at somebody else's expense, but it's
yeah.
very sad.
Well, I'm hoping that thanks to people like you who are sort of leading the way, there will be more resources for all these kids who do reach their 20s and suddenly realize, that they've been betrayed and that they are in, that they need these support systems. I'm really hoping they'll be available.
Yeah, me too, because we have no safety net now. All we have is each other, and that's a
Yeah.
frightening place to be, because none of us know what the hell's going on either. you know
Yeah, yeah. So would you recommend if somebody's watching this and they are just beginning that detransition process, where would you suggest they go? Would you suggest the Reddit group or some?
Yeah, the Reddit group is a good resource. There are Facebook groups that are good resources, and because you need support through this. This
Yeah.
is this is a terrifying thing to be doing. And if you do go to a therapist, I would highly recommend, don't go to a gender therapist. They
No.
are not going to understand what is going on. Go to
Exactly.
a regular ass therapist, and you need to work through your trauma, because this is very traumatic.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it helps.